All right, I'll use my X-ray vision. We have Michael Salati. You flew in from California. Yes.
Woo!
So he is a web developer, right?
Yes.
He's a web developer, and originally from Connecticut. So not too far. Was organizing the GDG in New Haven, and has left it into some safe hands, right?
I hope so.
Into Rainer's hands, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So Michael Salati is going to give us a great talk, all right, on Angular web components. He set it all up. Check it out. I'm not going to talk anymore because I talk too much. Let Michael take it from here. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your knowledge. I will catch the recording because I have to run and set up. Bye. Have fun. Thank you.
Well, I don't think I'm generally as loud as Eva, but I'm hoping everyone can hear me fairly well. Yeah? Okay, good. If not, I apologize. Just yell at me and I'll be louder. So I'm assuming most of you guys have had some experience developing on the web, right? Whether that might be just plain HTML, some jQuery. How many guys here use frameworks like React, Vue, or Angular? So a few of us. And for the rest of you guys, do you guys typically just stick HTML and like JavaScript for the most part? That's a little bit, that's a few. That's actually about even because some people don't want to raise hands, and that's fine. But that's okay. So we're going to be discussing web components today, and specifically we're going to delve a little bit into the Angular side of things, and hopefully you'll appreciate why, because it gets really, really cool. About myself, that looks bad. About myself, I am a front-end developer. I've been a developer for about 3 years after I did a coding boot camp back in Connecticut, and then I learned JavaScript, jQuery, Blaze, and about 2 years ago, I decided to dip my feet into Angular, which first I tried AngularJS, and I hated every minute of it. Then I realized, oh, why am I torturing myself? Angular 2 is coming around the corner. This was during the beta phases of it. It was completely different. It actually made sense to me. And then they broke it like 2 months after I started using it. And then I learned how to do it again. And the point being behind all of this, learn from my pain. I've been fortunate and unfortunate enough to be using Angular since the early beta phases of Angular 2. So I have seen the changes. I have cried myself to sleep many nights for broken code. And if there's anything that I can impart on you, or if you have any questions or you want to explore this world, please feel free to ask me. More important things, I'm a drinker of coffee. Thank you. And I am a lover of memes. So, the main stuff we're going to be discussing today. First one is going to be web components and what they are. And web components is going to lead us to custom elements. And once we start discussing elements, and when you want to think about elements, think of your div tags, your p tags, your buttons. They all have properties, attributes, they all have functionality, like click listeners and whatnot. Then we're going to get into the Angular elements, and then we're going to code something that I haven't thought out at all, so I'm going to be taking your guys' suggestion and as to what you want to see. Please don't make it difficult. So, out of curiosity, how many of you guys have heard of web components or know what web components are? Okay, that's 40%? I'm not good at math.
7%.
It's a percentage. It's a good percentage. Cool. For those of you who don't know what web components are, and I'm going to read this and I'm going to dissect it. Web components are a set of web platform APIs that allow you to create new, custom, reusable, encapsulated HTML tags to use in your web pages. Web components are a standard. I believe you heard Amal ask you guys about the W3C and what that is. They set some of these standards. They have set the standard for web components. Now, web components and custom elements are a little bit different, and we'll get into that later, but just keep it simple. Web components, it's a library to build web or custom elements. So components sound reusable HTML tags, kind of self-enclosed. This might sound familiar to some of the things that you've done in the past. If you've used your Angular or your Vue or your React, they're all component-driven libraries and frameworks that you build components, you reuse them, and you build your gorgeous websites that way. So what's the difference between that and web components? Well, those are going to be defined as frameworks. And when you use them, you might notice that you have to end up loading in the entire framework. There's a lot of tooling around it. And if you end up building a Vue or React app, you're kind of committed to using Vue or React throughout your entire application. Compared to web components and custom elements, like those you get from Polymer or Stencil, they allow you to build out these components. You export them, and you can just drop them into the head tag of any file or web page that you want. And you just call the tags like you would call a div tag. So you can embed these web components or custom elements into your plain HTML, into your React, into your Angular, any framework you want. You're not committed because you're not building out this entire complex infrastructure based on the framework. It's just the component. So, web components sound really cool. How are we actually going to be able to create a custom element? Well, this is a sample of a custom element that you could have. You notice we have our class called Hello World, and it extends the HTML component, HTML element. This is a very ES6 specific feature. Now, the component has a lot of things that it can do. We can define our attributes and listen to changes to those attributes. That way we can update the code inside of our component. So we see that we have the static array of attributes called observed attributes. We have the attribute changes callbacks. That's just going to trigger when one of those values changes. It'll give you the old value and the new value. They also have lifecycle hooks. So when in your code you register an element to the DOM or remove an element from the DOM, you can trigger callbacks so you can run code to either clean up, finish a post request, or anything that you need to do. You can get and set property values. So we have our get and set, and you can also dispatch events, because however cool it is to have things work on the inside of the component, you would like it to work outside. For example, a button, it has on click. When you click it, it emits the event. You would probably like, if you were designing your own custom button, that when you click it, you can tell the rest of the DOM, hey, this click has happened, here's the event. Or as someone is filling a form, to emit the value of that form out. And then the custom elements, at the bottom we have the define, which allows us to declare that custom element to the DOM. So we have the define takes the two arguments, the first one being a string, which is going to be the tag that's going to be used, and then the actual class behind that tag. So now, anywhere in the application, I can do open bracket, hello world, close bracket, etc. And I'll have this element in there. But should seem a little bit harder than it is. And it is. It's not really easy to just build these custom elements. Because in that little snippet of code, I haven't discussed styling, I haven't discussed structure or layout or anything like that. It was a pretty simple logic, and it doesn't really do much of anything. Hopefully there's an easier way. And there is. We have tools like Polymer that's made by Google, or like Stencil made by the guys behind Ionic, that allow you to build your custom elements and export them into native web components that can be used anywhere. And two libraries that you can use, or element libraries that you can use, is Vaadin, which they're gorgeous. I just discovered them like last week. Yeah, it was last week. Custom elements that are all built in Polymer that you can use anywhere. And then there's Ionic itself. The Ionic team made Stencil to take their old Ionic code, which if you guys have used Ionic in the past, you might have realized it's pretty much has been exclusively for Angular. With Ionic 3, it can be used anywhere because they're native web components. They're not Angular components being used anymore. So, what does that look like? Well, right here you might have difficulty seeing, but we have a simple Vaadin component here, which is just an input field and a button. And the code that I had to write to use this, really simple. Vaadin text field, which is the text field with the placeholder type something. And then we have Vaadin button on click, which should look familiar because the regular button has the on-click property or emitter that you can call a function. And so just to see what that looks like, hello GDG Bronx, click me, function ran, all the function did was an alert. So I didn't include that I had an alert, but there was an alert there. Cool, simple to use. Once you build it, they're just a regular component that you can use in your application anywhere else, like you would anywhere else. But this talk is about Angular. It's not about Stencil, it's not about Polymer, it's not about Vaadin. It's about how we can use Angular, because ideally, some of you guys who might be using React or Vue, because, oh, it's so cool and so popular, you're going to be done with that by the end of this talk. Did someone, me? I think so. Yeah. No. No more React. Here is kind of the base of the Angular component, and it looks a little bit bigger than what I showed you before for the custom HTML component, but there's a few things that are a little bit more specific or interesting or detailed. For example, I have this template right over here where I actually have defined what my component is going to render out, which is going to be a block quote, a little citation, and maybe some of this looks familiar if you guys have done Angular or Vue. I defined the styling of this, right? Pretty simple styling. This is just some plain CSS, nothing complex. And then I threw together a few little bits that I have a attribute called site. So in my custom component, in my Angular component, I could do site equal, and then I can give it a value. I don't think this is too much more complex than what you guys seen before. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. And how I mentioned that the custom elements have lifecycle hooks, my Angular components have lifecycle hooks. So on instantiation of this component, I could run something on the on init. Seems fairly simple. And then, typically in my Angular application, I would just declare the slide component, bootstrap up my application, and I get going from there. Seems fairly simple, especially if you have some Angular experience. Kind of only just gone over how you make an Angular application. This talk really isn't about Angular applications, it's about custom elements using Angular. So, what's going to be the difference? Remember that module on the last slide? We're going to make just a few tweaks. And really, the only important tweak is right here. The constructor and the ngDo bootstrap. In the constructor, I pass an injector, which is a very Angular specific thing, but what it allows me to do is on the do bootstrap, which is when the Angular application would normally be initialized, I'm just going to take my Angular element, or Angular component, which is the slide component, right over here, and I'm going to give it the selector tag ngSlideQuote. So custom elements define the tag, and I pass in my component. And this should hopefully look somewhat familiar to right here. Custom elements define, the selector, and then the class. So skipping forward a little bit. Boom. All right, so we're back here. Okay. Between my first Angular module and my second Angular module, did you guys see that much of a difference? We can go back and forth between these just so you guys get a better feel. So look at my regular Angular module. Look at my Angular Elements module. Regular Angular module. Angular Elements module. Really, the only important changes is right here, this do bootstrap and the constructor. Once I have those two bits done or declared, all of a sudden, I'm not just building an Angular application. I'm taking all these components that I'm building out, and I'm going to be using them as web elements. So, do you guys want to see how this is done? Cool. Even if you said no, I'm going to do it anyway. So, this is the few commands that we're going to have to do to get this started. And I haven't live coded this yet, so I'm not 100% ready. So we'll see how this goes. So we're going to create a new Angular application, new Angular demo. I'm actually going to cd into my document. workspace. Once that is done, we are gonna, so created a command to create a new Angular application. You notice just ng new Angular demo. And I'm gonna do everything with Sass just because it's easier for me. And please work. Not working. Do I have internet working? I do. While that's waiting, do you guys have any questions so far? Yay, no questions. Easy audience, I guess. I'm gonna kill this and hope for the best as I run it again. Cool. That looks better. Cool. So now we're just going to jump into the Angular demo project. We're going to add this next command, ng add Angular elements. And while that's going, there's one more command I'm going to have to run just because the document register elements library is kind of broken. I'm just going to have to lock it back to a previous version. So while that finishes up, okay. So while that's going, do you guys have any suggestions, recommendations, requests as to what sort of application you guys would like to see us build out right now with web components? Please, anything.
Please.
What?
Like a dashboard maybe? Is that doable?
I guess anything is doable.
Like a side, maybe like a sort of panel side. I don't know.
You know, we'll try to throw together a dashboard. Now my HTML skills are going to be like ripped apart by you guys, so thank you. All right, so let me serve that application up. Let's get our Visual Studio Code, and then we can do a side-by-side comparison. No, we'll see how this works. You know, I'm gonna stick with something a little bit simpler. Maybe not necessarily a dashboard, but we'll maybe do just an incrementer. Really keeping it simple for myself because I really hope I'm not gonna mess that up. All right, so while that is going, I'm just gonna open up a terminal here, and we're gonna generate two components real quick. Let me minimize this for the time being. So can you guys kind of see that? I want to be able to jack it up. Okay, ng generate component, and we'll call it button. So we're going to generate a button component, and then we're going to do a, I don't know, display. Cool. So just to clear, two new components in my Angular application. I'm actually going to split this out. It's going to be too much side by side. So inside of my folder, I now have two components, the button and the display. I'm going to immediately make a few quick changes. First one being, app component is going to go out the door because we're not going to be building just a regular Angular application. So app component, gone. We don't need that. But we will need our button. We will need our display. So I'm going to put this in my entry components. And I'm going to create an exports, and I am going to put it there as well. Now there's two more things that I need, which I cannot remember everything off the top of my head, so I'm going to go back and steal this bit. Cool. I'm going to create a constructor. ng do bootstrap. All right, so we have custom elements dot define. We're going to create one called ng button. And this last bit I'm just going to copy here for ease. Cool. So we had created our two components, the button component and the display component. We're just going to have to declare them as custom elements so we can use them. And now that we have those two declared, and our application should be running, if we hit up our demo, we see absolutely nothing, which, great, but not really. All right, let's fix this. So we, again, just the two components, the ng button and the ng display. So we go to the index.html, where normally my Angular application will get injected into this app root area. But because we're not doing that anymore, we're going to use these native components that we created. So we created an ng button and an ng display. And now on the refresh, display works and button works. So all of a sudden, we're using these components as native elements. Let's step this up a level. Ideally, a button is going to increment whatever we have on the display, right? So our button component, we're going to actually throw in here two buttons. We're going to call one increment, and the other one we're going to call decrement. And these should ideally be able to do something. So we're going to add a click event, and I'm going to may have a function called increment and decrement again. All right. So I'm getting these little red squiggles because these functions don't really exist yet. So we're going to hit up our class. We're going to create two functions, increment and decrement. And so that's cool. We can click on the buttons and they're going to do something. I'll just do some console logs here. Inc. Console log, dec. And now when I click increment, you'll see that my increment function is logging, decrement is logging. But as of right now, everything is being self-contained within this component. I want to have communication back and forth between my components. And normally in Angular, that would be easy because I can just do binding by putting components inside of each other. But because that's not an option anymore, we're using custom elements and we're building web components. How would you normally be able to modify other elements? You might not be able to, but what you would normally do is maybe on click trigger some event, and then you can modify stuff by calling functions in JavaScript. So what we're going to do is we're going to create two outputs. So we're going to import output and event emitter. And so we're going to do output, and the output is going to be called increment, which is going to be increment, and that is going to be of the type, that's going to be a new event emitter, all right, I have to call this, I'll just call this one up and I'll call the other one down. So I've declared two event emitters, up and down. And what I'm going to do is call this dot up dot emit. So whenever someone clicks the increment function, we're going to pass out increment. And whenever they click decrement, we're going to take the down and we're going to emit the value decrement. And now inside of our ng button, we can do on increment. And we'll stick with on increment now. For now, increment, and this function doesn't do anything yet. So we're going to create a function right here inside of our HTML. So hopefully that should work the way I expected. Click increment and it does nothing perfectly. All right, well, I found a way to bust it. Give me 1 second to fix this up. All right, so document dot get element by tag name. We only have one of these. All right, so const button. And you might notice again, this is my Angular component that I'm just doing document get element by ID ng button. So this is totally pure JavaScript DOM manipulation. I'm sure you guys have seen something like this before. Button dot add event listener increment console log e okay. So now I can yank this and just attach an event listener to my ng button. What did I miss? Boom, that closes. Cool. So now, or not, Jesus. Button add event listener. You know, I'm gonna pause on this. I apologize. Oh. Oh, wow. So, you guys remember I called these up and down? And now I feel like an idiot. So, add event listener up. There we go. So when you actually listen for the right thing, now I have this triggering, and it says custom event because this event isn't really regular an HTML event. This event is specific to my component. But as I click it, the event is triggering in my index HTML, and the value that I wanted, detail, is just increment. So if I want to get a little bit more specific, console log e.detail, and boom. So I have the increment, and I'm going to throw this back together real quick for my decrement. All right, so down. And again, this looks like plain old JavaScript DOM manipulation to everyone in this room, right? Not all at once, thanks. All right. So decrement, increment. So next thing we're going to want to be able to do, and here's where things are going to get a little bit more fun. We're able to output the event and the value to the DOM, but we would love to be able to pass these values into the display component. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit up our display component, and we're going to just have a value. We're just going to display a count. Count is going to be really, really simple. Count is just going to be a number set to 0, and we're going to want to be able to modify the count value. So, or we're going to want to be able to pass in new values or tell it to change. So I'm going to create an input. So you guys have seen how we output values. We're going to input a value now. I'm going to call this up. So this is just going to do this count plus plus. and we're going to do the same input for the down value. So that way, whenever we call it, we're just going to modify these values. Cool. Count, count. All right, that looks good. And so last thing we're going to do is we're going to grab that display component. Display. 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 Set attribute. Up. And we'll do the same thing for the down value as well. Cool. So now we have our component, it just says 0. And you know what? I'm going to ignore this for the time being. This isn't the most important thing. What I do want to show you guys is something a little bit more cool and or interesting. So you guys, for the most part, have been hopefully enjoying these slides. Just by show of hands, actual show of hands. How many think of the slides themselves have been okay? One person, 2.5, half a I have up to like maybe 4 of you. That's cool. I actually, and this is what I spent the most time working on, and I want you guys to take a look at this. It's the, this entire slide deck has been custom elements. And just so you guys can see like how much this actually can do, I want you guys to notice I have 3 components in here. I have Vaadin, which is one of the components libraries that I mentioned. Another Vaadin, the Juicy Eights editor, which is kind of that code editor that's been in the slides where I've had my code snippets. I'm even using Vue inside of this little thing. And all of my Angular elements that I created, all the values that I'm passing into it are being binded from my Vue application. And inside of all of these Angular elements themselves, I'm throwing in some of those other components. Like I have my Vaadin living inside of here. I have the Juicy Ace editor. And a lot of my declarations just from Vue, all inside of here. So that way, and I don't know if you guys know about this Chrome extension. It's called Web Appalizer. It lets you know everything running inside of your app. Right now, this entire slide deck was running with Angular and Vue and Polymer. And when I discuss some of these event outputs and inputs, for example, these, this status bar or nav bar right down here, as you jump around, it's outputting the event. Another event is listening for the changes to know which slide to go to. So if we look inside of here, the progress bar is emits values that I have to get to the top of these slides. The slide wrapper is looking for. So all of this was built with the components. So let me just actually run the server again. Surf. Cool. Anyway, live coding didn't work as well as I was hoping, but you guys saw this entire thing built with just pure web elements and web components that I will be putting up a bundle later so anyone can just build their own slides using this. And you can do this in plain HTML. I just happen to use Vue because I want to see how meta I can get with this. Anyway, so we created it. We saw how some of this works. Do you guys have any questions? You guys are going to be really easy if you have no questions. It doesn't even have to be about the talk. You can like, I don't know, my birthday, my social security, my credit card, like anything at this point. Okay, well, thank you for making my life easy. I am available on the web on almost every platform, just my name, Michael Salati. And and I hope you guys had a good time. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, if you guys want to take a quick break, restroom.